semester here. We're going to be taking a few images that I collected and making this thing. So yours obviously won't be the same as this, but the aim of the project is for you guys to get learning how these layer panels interact and how these blending modes can start to interact as well. So with this, I don't have anything crazy going on. I have a few simple layers and some few simple masks, and that gives us this effect. And then I have some adjustments on top that gives us this effect. So it's pretty simple and it's pretty straight up. So we're going to recreate it. So I'm going to create a new document just as a challenge and kind of get into it. Okay, so here we go. We're going to be doing it on an 8x10. I like to keep it RGB when I'm working on the screen, and then when I go to print it, change it to CMYK. For the remainder of the year, we're going to be working pretty much on RGB. But it's important to remember that when you are working for a print, you have to change that color over. It lets you know how it's going to look when it's printed, or else the printer will take care of that, and then it'll come out and you'll be really confused. You might also see a couple new things on here: grayscale and bitmap, lab color. Lab color, you're not really going to use that unless it comes up in the project. Usually meching. Sometimes when you have to send things out to printers, when you have a really specific color, that might be coming up. But besides that, you're pretty much going to be sticking to RGB. Grayscale, no color associated. Remember, CMYK and RGB can be a black and white image, but it's not truly grayscale. It has different levels of color in it. They're all just slightly colored. And then bitmap is either the pixel is on or it's off. If I zoom in here, you'll kind of see gradations of color here. Even that line, it's blue, then it's white, but you can see how it's kind of fuzzy along the lines here. It's not like that when it's a bitmap. It's either white or it's black, and that's it. With this too, we're going to keep it at an 8-bit color. That's a new thing. I don't know if it's in Illustrator. That's just the depth of the color. So if you ever stream like a YouTube video and the blacks are like really kind of choppy and look really gross, that's because they don't have enough kind of values to. They don't have enough of like a color library, or I guess, to draw from. So you think of it about it kind of like this. There's 32 million different colors. There's 16 million colors. Then there's 8 million colors. And when you keep reducing that and reducing that, it looks choppy. I don't know if any of you watched Game of Thrones or anything like that, but there was a particular episode that came out where it was pretty much all at night, and it was shot with natural light, so it was really dark. And a lot of people were like, "This looks awful," but then some other people were like, "Oh, I didn't have any problem," and it was because their stream allowed them to have a higher quality of color. You're going to keep it at 8-bit for right now, though, and pretty much for everything that you use. If you're going to like a cinema thing or something really specific that will come up at your job sometime, you might need to change it. But for now, just keep it what it's built at. So we're good to go. All right. So let's see here. It's acting a little funky. All right. I guess we can't get away from technical problems even at home here. All right. So here we are. Now the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to unlock that background layer. Now that we can, that means we can start actually using it. If we don't, well, I'm a liar. But you can't make any transformations to it. So from here, I'm going to place my first image. Remember to keep your files organized. This is a great time to kind of catch up on keeping everything organized. So I'm going to reach in for today's class, which is the blending images. You guys can go online and find some images that will work out for you. This is kind of all the things that I grabbed. I wanted to use a portrait. These are pretty much all photos that were taken on my phone. This was taken on my phone. This was taken on my phone. All phone pictures here. And then I thought it might look like a Basquiat painting or something with that. So I pulled an image from Carhartt's website, and then I pulled some texture images and thought maybe those could work. So for the first image here, I grab portrait here. I'm going to just drag it into Photoshop, drag it to the icon. Right, I'm going to minimize this. Just kind of drag it right in. All right, so when we place an image in Photoshop, you'll get this thing right up here. I'm going to say 60%, and that's the size of it. So right now, it's only at 60% of its full size. If you're placing an image and it's like this big and it says it's 100%, you can't go any further with this image. You have to either get a new image or be okay with it looking like this pixelated. So I'm going to just bring it up to size for myself here. Now it says it's a little bit different looking than my original one. That's okay. It says 72, so we're in the clear. And remember, that's because when you place an image, you can't make it bigger than 100%. If you do, it's pixelated and it's gross. So you're going to press OK right there. This looks good. Right. So I have that name right there. I'm just going to name that portrait. And it's really important for you guys to keep organized as you go. So I'm naming that over there. Let's bring in the other image that I worked with, this image of a telephone pole. All right, I'm going to size that up. We've got plenty of room to work with. Press OK. Then I'm going to bring in this shot of flowers that I have. Now, it didn't go the full length, so I'm going to go over to that layer panel. I'm going to click in this region. I'm going to hold down my Alt key and then see those two cursors come up. I'm going to let that go. And now here we go. So I'm going to press Command T to transform that. And that is the setup. That is how we got going. So going back to this image, you're like, how does that work? Well, let's get rid of these. So pressing that little square will make that eye pop up. That means the layers in view. So this is right here. I'll zoom in for you guys. This is called the layer blend. Here you can see in real time how these layers can change when this setting is changed. So ours was at exclusion, and that's where we got. But you can see here, let's see, do I have everything layered up? Yep, okay. So you can see here that that's kind of how things can interact. So there's a bunch of different ways to do things. For the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it the same. Now let's check what our flowers were at. Those were at lighter color. And they all have different properties. I could talk an hour about how they all interact differently, but it's now you can just cycle through. Before you had to click and have it load and everything. So right off the gate, you're like, Noah, you made it up. You're a cheat. You're a liar. You're false. You clearly doesn't look like what you were working on before. And that's because I have these layer masses that I created. And you can see that there's something going on there. So a layer mask is basically where an image is transparent and where it's opaque. So I click right here on the bottom, that white square with a black circle in it. Click that, and now this pops up. This is our layer mask. So if I click on this, you can see it's all white right now. If I hold down Alt, now I'm in that layer. I hold down Alt and click it. But I want to have certain areas of this image be opaque and certain areas not. So I'm going to click that for all of them, just for the sake of the demonstration. Now I'm going to turn off these two layers of the flowers, and I'm going to look at her face. And I'm like, well, in the original one, her face kind of came through so you could see it, and then kind of some elements came through. So I want to get rid of this layer, this telephone pole in some areas. So I have that selected. I click the layer mask of the telephone pole. Caught myself slipping up there. All right. So I'm going to click that, don't click the image, click the layer mask. I'm going to go over to my brush. I have my foreground color selected as black. Remember, in Illustrator, this was the fill color and this was the stroke color, but that doesn't really exist here. So the foreground color is the color that you're working with. So now I have that selected. I have a brush. I have my general brush, soft round. You can change the hardness so it can be more like this. Change it to the softness. I'm going to keep it pretty soft so it looks a little bit more natural. And keep the size up a little bit more so it's even softer. Now we're good. My opacity is 100 and 100. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit so it's soft and I kind of work it in. So there we go. So now I'm kind of just making it feel a little bit more like the image is kind of seeping through, kind of adding some details. All right. Maybe I need that telephone pole to stick out right here because I like those letters as a graphic designer here. All right. So now I'm going to hold down my Alt key. I'm going to click in there, and now you can see what I was painting. So in those black areas, that's going to be transparent. In the white areas, that's going to be opaque. So in the gray areas, that's a little bit of both. So it's like kind of turning the opacity to 50%. If I made this whole image gray, it would be kind of like turning if I made the whole mask gray, it would kind of be like turning the opacity to 50%. Think about it like that. So we're going to do the same thing with the flowers. Now that's a lot to kind of come at. So remember, this is a layer mask, and we're going to paint in black where we don't want the image to show up and leave it white where we do want it to show up. So I'm going to select my layer mask for the flower bottom layer. I know I don't want that hard edge because I kind of want the flowers to feel like they're all floating. So I'm going to get rid of that and then keep painting in there nice and soft. All right. I'm going to do the same thing up top if there's anything that's, all right, looks like we're pretty good, but I'm going to get rid of the stuff around her face again. And now I click a lot of times, guys, because that gives me more opportunity to press the undo button. Oops. If I did all this and I was like, oh shit, I didn't like that. You can only do it so many times. So now I'm going to flip that color to white in the bottom left-hand corner here. And I'm going to just make it a little bit harder so it kind of feels like the flowers are kind of falling behind her. right. All right. So we're pretty good here. All right, so we kind of got a little taste of layer masks here. Layer masks, not clipping masks, layer masks. And we kind of painted some black in there so that they kind of started to feel a little bit more natural. So I'm going to move that down a little bit so it feels like more of a pattern. See right here, edges are still going pretty hard, so I'm going to turn that to black, start painting in there. Remember, I have the opacity down and the softness down so it feels a little bit more natural. And the edges are less hard. All right, so you're still like, no, this doesn't really look like it. Well, now we're gonna go in to our adjustments. We're gonna go make a gradient map, and we're gonna go from there. So it's not gonna be the same color as last time, but let's see here. How do we do it here? No. So I lied. We are going to make a HueSaturation layer adjustment. So some people that may have worked in the past, you might have gone up here, then go layer, new layer adjustment. I like to go over in the window here. It's right here, hue adjustment. And now you can make the colors a little bit more intense. And this is where we start to get our color shift. So I shifted things over a little bit here. And that's kind of where we got our first adjustment. We just got it a little bit. Just a little bit. And then I added a little color balance. So this adjusts the certain tones of images. I'm right at the mid-tone right here. Again, it's not going to be perfectly the same as it was last time, but I'll do my best to get pretty close. Right. Highlight. All right. Then that starts to look like it. I added a posterized layer. I'm going to get rid of that. We don't need that. Now levels. So I'm going to kind of walk through what each one of these do. Levels. So let's take it back one step. I started with the HueSaturation. Let's take it from the top. We have the brightness contrast. Obviously, that does what you would think it would do. Make the image a little bit more bright. I'm going to keep that for right now because I kind of like that. Levels. This is where you control it's called the histogram of an image. These are the shadows over to the left right here. And then to the right here, are the highlights, and then here are the midtones. Now, to do this, I can adjust the midtone, so my grays, I can have them kind of be right there. I can bring the darkest level up a bit, so you see areas like here where they're more gray. Now it's going to be black there. I can change that so that black is really only a gray color. Then you can see how it kind of makes things a little bit faded. All right. So if I bring down that white, you can see that those levels are now being pushed over and being kind of compressed in. So you have levels, then you have curves. It's pretty much the same thing. I'm kind of just, you play around with it, you get a feel for it. Cool thing you can do is curve each channel a color. So it's kind of like adjusting those tones again. So you can make the highlights really green, you can make the lights really not. And you get some interesting effects. I like to use it a little bit more subtly instead of being so dramatic with it. And see now that low lights have some greens in them. That looks kind of interesting. Trying to keep my colors, kind of have a scheme going. All right, then exposure. Now with brightness and that brightness contrast layer, what happens with exposure is it makes the brights really bright, but it doesn't really touch the shadows. Brightness and contrast makes everything brighter and makes everything darker. With this, if you bring it up, you can see how those highlights are kind of getting blown out, then the rest of the image follows. All right? Offset exposure is kind of getting that fade again, or getting rid of that fade. And then gamma correction is correcting for that fade. Can you see? With a lot of this stuff, guys, I mean, I don't want to, feel like the prophet here, but I don't really, I don't know the technicals with a lot of this stuff. You just kind of get a feel for it. So you can see kind of like what offset exposure does, and then you'll get it. You kind of just have to play around with each one of these. Vibrance. So we used a HueSaturation layer, and you can see you have to kind of get the original color up, but now you see that this vibrance layer, and then we have vibrance and saturation. Vibrance makes every color but yellow brighter and more intense. And then saturation makes every color and yellow more intense. So you're like, well, no, it's more red. Well, the yellows are part of those reds. So you gotta kind of think of how every color works together to make an image. So maybe I'll boost that up a little bit. I kind of like that going on. All right, so after that we have that HueSaturation layer, which we already did. I'll kind of go a little bit more in depth with that. You can shift the color around. It's really kind of fun to see. And now remember, with all these, you get a layer mask associated with it as well. So if I only want it to affect a certain area or not affect a certain area, I can get rid of it. I can paint in there. Or I can just do a little bit. So you can see how the opacity is just a little bit. So I get like a purple color if I'm halfway there. So it's kind of fun where you can get some cool like luminous types of effects if you work with it. All right, and then from that too, we're controlling the value of the hue value of all the colors together at once, but we can change just one color. Let's say the reds. So we can kind of maybe offset what's going on. And maybe they don't want to be as saturated. And maybe we want to bring up the lightness, or maybe bring them down and create some contrast. That's pretty cool. Like that. We have a nice kind of cool color scheme going. All right, maybe I want to bring up the greens a bit. All right, so it looks like the greens are not those greens that we see. Let's try cyan. Seems like cyan is that yellow color, so we tweak that a little bit, like kind of like the sting of it right now. Cool. We'll kind of turn that off, see where we came from. And that's how much you can do with just that one adjustment layer. Color balance, we talked about. You kind of just balance out each of the tones that are associated with like photography. Black and white. You're kind of creating a true black and white image here. But remember, you can adjust each one of the colors and the intensity of each one of the colors. Try not to stray too far because it starts to look unnatural. You can see how there's a little bit of artifacts right there from bumping up the yellow. So just be mindful. Delete that layer. Then on top of that, we have photo filters. It should be pretty straight up. You have color, change it. Luminosity right here is an important one. Maintains, see the whites, maintains those. If you don't click that, it's kind of like putting like a piece of yellow glass in front of something. Maybe you can change the blending mode, and then you have a little bit more green in it. See how that's starting to work? All right. Now the next one up here is channel mixing. Another way, remember when we were at the levels and you could adjust each color individually? It's kind of the same thing. Going in, adjusting things. Kind of see how we can get some cool effects going here. That's interesting. All right, color lookup. I'm going to leave that alone for right now, but basically just adjust your image. It has some presets to load in some profiles, so it's kind of like loading a like a filter. So was a cool one is moonlight from daylight. I think this is, so it'll kind of make it look like it's dark out. This is cool when you're like really doing some comping work. Talk about that later. Get rid of that layer. Turn that just down a bit more. All right. Inverting, I'm going to use this a lot, Command-I. So you see how that layer mask for that is changing to all black. I'm selecting it, and I'm pressing Command-I. So that'll get rid of it, and then now it's the opposite. Now I can paint in the white. So that's pretty cool. When you don't do it so soft, you get less grays. So let's go to an impressionist brush here. Go to Cezanne. So then we can get some interesting colors. So that's pretty wacky. All right. Get rid of that. Posterize or posturize. Basically, if you're familiar with the Obama Hope poster, it's kind of the similar feel. It takes levels of that color and kind of reduces them. So sometimes your printer might not be able to handle like so many different colors or something like that, and you might want to simplify it. I don't really use it too much. Threshold. So remember when I talked about bitmaps and how they have it's either black or it's white and that's it. There's no gradation. That's kind of what a threshold is. You can get some cool effects in this. I like saving these things out and using that as a layer mask. But this is black and it's white and no colors in between. It's really cool to get some gritty posters out of that feature. And then you have selective color, so kind of like that channel mixing or that color balance. You can kind of change things around. So there we go. All right, and last but not least, the gradient map. I use this a lot. I like using it because it's so versatile for me. Now, when you add that color in, So the darks will be over here and lights will be over here. And then it kind of just makes the image kind of a duotone. So instead of being like black and white, it's dark blue and light blue. And you can go in and you can adjust that. So you can kind of bring those up so that those darker colors now are from the midtones all the way to all the way down. You can add a color in here too. Let's add white. So now those highlights. I really like that. I use this a lot. I know you can change around the blending with it, and it kind of affects colors in interesting ways. Maybe you can turn that down here just a little bit. It's interesting. I like playing around with that a lot. All right, so that should be it for creating kind of our project. Now, the final step I like to do is organize things out. So my layer panel, I click all my adjustments and I press Command G, and that makes a group. So I'll just call that Global Adjustments. And for today, that's all I want you guys to do is just create global adjustments. Don't worry about creating clipping masks. We'll go into that in the future. But just kind of try to make something interesting off of just a few filters and blending these images together, and maybe dabble in some layer masks. So I think that should be about it for today. Use your own images to kind of create something similar. I have a couple examples up online of things that I've done in the past for examples, but this should kind of provide you guys some inspiration to keep going. So can't wait to see your work. And if you have any questions, of course, email me. I'll be on the line. Shoot me a Google Hangout. It'll be quicker, or if you want some quick advice, I can also do an audio call if anyone would want to do that. So, all right. Look forward to your work. See you soon.